What if I told you the quickest way to unsettle a narcissist isn't revenge? It's your emotional withdrawal. Because the moment you stop reacting, stop justifying, and stop trying to prove yourself, you become someone they can no longer influence. If you've ever felt exhausted, confused, or controlled by someone like this, take a moment to reflect. Where in your life do you need firmer boundaries? Emotional detachment is one of the most powerful shifts you can make when dealing with a narcissistic person because it directly cuts off the very thing they depend on to operate, your emotional energy. A narcissist is not simply interacting with you. They are feeding off your reactions, your frustration, your need to explain yourself, your attempts to be understood, even your anger. All of it becomes fuel. When you begin to detach emotionally, you are not becoming cold or uncaring. You are simply choosing not to invest your inner world into someone who takes advantage of it. At first, this feels unfamiliar. You may feel the urge to respond, to defend yourself, or to correct their distortions. That impulse is exactly what has kept the cycle going. Emotional detachment means noticing that urge and choosing not to act on it. You stop explaining your intentions to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop reacting to provocations designed to pull you back into the chaos. Instead, you respond minimally, neutrally, or not at all. What often follows is escalation. The narcissist may push harder, provoke more, or even attempt to charm you again. This is not a sign that detachment is failing. It is proof that it is working. They are trying to regain access to the emotional responses they've lost. Your consistency is what breaks this cycle. Over time, as you remain steady and emotionally unavailable to their manipulation, their control over you weakens. Emotional detachment is not about changing them. It is about reclaiming control over yourself. It is the quiet decision to no longer participate in a dynamic that drains you, even when every instinct tells you to react. Setting strong, non-negotiable boundaries is where your internal clarity begins to show in your behavior. A narcissistic person often operates under the belief that rules do not apply to them, especially in relationships. They test limits, ignore discomfort, and rely on your hesitation, guilt, or desire to keep the peace. Boundaries interrupt this pattern because they introduce something the narcissist resists: accountability. This is not about making dramatic statements or issuing threats. In fact, over-explaining your boundaries can weaken them because it opens the door for debate, manipulation, or dismissal. Instead, boundaries are most effective when they are simple, clear, and consistently enforced. You decide what behavior you will and will not accept, and then you align your actions with that decision. If disrespect occurs, you disengage. If communication becomes toxic, you step back. If your time or energy is misused, you withdraw access. The challenge is not in stating the boundary, but in maintaining it when it is tested. A narcissist will rarely accept limits calmly. They may mock your boundary, ignore it, or attempt to punish you for having one. This is where most people struggle because the discomfort of holding the line feels intense. But every time you give in, you reinforce the belief that your limits are flexible and can be pushed. Consistency is what transforms a boundary from a statement into a reality. Over time, boundaries reshape the dynamic. The narcissist may not suddenly become respectful, but they begin to encounter resistance instead of compliance. More importantly, you begin to experience a shift within yourself. You stop overextending, over-explaining, and over-tolerating. You recognize that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Radical self-focus is the turning point where your energy stops revolving around the narcissist and begins returning to its rightful place, your own life. In a narcissistic dynamic, your attention is gradually trained to stay fixed on them, their moods, their reactions, their approval, their criticism. You become hyper aware of what they need, what might upset them, and how to keep things stable. Over time, this creates a quiet but powerful imbalance where your identity, priorities, and even your sense of worth become entangled with their perception of you. Shifting into radical self-focus breaks that pattern. It is not about ignoring reality or pretending the other person does not exist. It is about consciously redirecting your mental, emotional, and physical energy back toward yourself. Instead of asking, how do I make them understand me? You begin asking, what do I need right now? Instead of analyzing their behavior, you start investing in your own growth, your goals, your peace, and your well-being. This shift may feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, because you are stepping out of a role you have been conditioned to play. A narcissist often reacts strongly to this change. They may attempt to pull you back in through guilt, criticism, or sudden displays of attention. These reactions are not random. They are attempts to regain the central position they once held in your life. The more you stay grounded in your own priorities, the less effective these tactics become. Your attention is no longer something they can easily command. As you continue this practice, something deeper begins to happen. Your sense of identity strengthens. You become less reactive, less dependent on external validation, and more aligned with your own values. The dynamic loses its grip, not because they have changed, but because you have recentered your life around yourself. Walking away, whether mentally, emotionally, or physically, is the most definitive shift you can make because it removes you from the entire dynamic rather than trying to manage it. A narcissistic relationship often survives on cycles, conflict, confusion, reconciliation, and then repetition. Even when painful, these cycles keep you psychologically engaged. Walking away interrupts that pattern at its core. It is not always a dramatic exit. Sometimes it begins internally, where you stop expecting change, stop hoping for accountability, and stop seeking closure from someone who cannot provide it. Mentally walking away means you no longer invest thought energy into analyzing their behavior or replaying conversations. You recognize the patterns for what they are and choose not to personalize them. Emotionally walking away goes deeper. You release the need for their validation, approval, or understanding. This is often the hardest part because it involves letting go of the version of the relationship you hoped for. It requires accepting reality without trying to reshape it into something healthier than it is. In some cases, physical distance becomes necessary. This could mean limiting contact, creating space, or ending the relationship entirely. A narcissist often reacts strongly to this kind of withdrawal. They may attempt to re-engage you through manipulation, promises of change, or emotional pressure. These responses are driven by a loss of control, not genuine transformation. Staying consistent during this phase is crucial because any re-entry into the cycle can quickly restore the old dynamic. As you maintain this distance, clarity begins to replace confusion. The emotional intensity fades, and you start to see the situation without distortion. Walking away is not about punishment or proving a point. It is about choosing a life where your energy is no longer consumed by a pattern that offers no real growth, stability, or respect. There is not a fifth strategy in the original framework of four. Trying to add one for the sake of it often weakens what actually works. The real impact comes from consistently applying the core shifts you have already seen, because these are not surface level tactics. They are deep behavioral changes that reshape the entire dynamic. What often gets mistaken as a fifth way is actually the integration of all four into a single steady mindset. This integration looks like emotional detachment, guiding your reactions, boundaries shaping your behavior, self-focus directing your energy, and the willingness to walk away anchoring your decisions. When these operate together, you no longer need new techniques or clever responses. Your presence itself changes. You become less reactive, less accessible to manipulation, and far more grounded in your own reality. At this stage, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop looking for strategies to manage the narcissist, and instead you begin living in a way where their behavior has less and less influence over you. You do not feel the same urgency to respond, prove, or engage. The dynamic loses its intensity because you are no longer feeding it with attention or emotional investment. What many people call a fifth way is actually this state of internal independence. It is where you are no longer trying to win, fix, or even fully understand the other person. You have stepped out of the cycle entirely. Even if they are still physically present in your life, your choices are no longer reactions to them. They are expressions of your own clarity and self-respect. And in that space, the need for additional tactics disappears because you are no longer participating in the game at all. There is not a sixth step to add here. Trying to keep numbering beyond the core four can actually pull you back into the same mindset of overthinking and overmanaging the situation. The deeper work is not about collecting more strategies. It is about strengthening the ones that already shift your position completely. What feels like a sixth way is often just a deeper level of mastery, where your responses become automatic rather than forced. At this level, you are no longer practicing detachment, you are detached. You are no longer reminding yourself to hold boundaries. You naturally uphold them without internal conflict. Your focus on yourself is no longer an effort. It becomes your default state. And the idea of walking away, whether emotionally or physically, no longer feels threatening. It feels like a valid and available choice at any moment. This is where consistency turns into identity. Earlier, you had to consciously choose not to react, to step back, to protect your energy. Now, those choices feel aligned with who you are, not something you have to force yourself to maintain. The narcissist may still behave the same way, but their actions no longer create the same internal disturbance in you. Their attempts to provoke, charm, or control begin to feel predictable rather than powerful. At this stage, the dynamic loses its grip almost entirely, not because they have stopped, but because you have stopped participating on the level they require. You are no longer emotionally hooked, no longer seeking resolution, and no longer available for the same cycles. The relationship, if it continues, exists on entirely different terms, ones that you define through your consistency. What appears to be an additional step is really the solidification of everything you have already built, where your peace is no longer dependent on what they do or say. There is not a seventh step to uncover. The urge to keep adding more often comes from the same place that kept you stuck before. The belief that if you just find one more strategy, one more insight, You will finally gain control over the situation. But this dynamic was never meant to be solved through accumulation. It shifts when you stop trying to outmaneuver it and start standing firmly outside of it. What feels like a seventh way is actually a deeper acceptance of reality. You begin to see the narcissist not as a puzzle to solve, but as a pattern that will continue regardless of your efforts. This clarity removes the emotional charge. You stop taking their behavior personally, not because it does not affect you at all, but because you understand it is not truly about you. It is a reflection of their own limitations, their need for control, their inability to engage in a balanced and reciprocal way. From this place, your responses become simpler. You do not overanalyze every interaction. You do not search for hidden meanings behind every word or action. You recognize the pattern quickly and adjust your level of engagement accordingly. Sometimes that means brief, neutral interaction. Sometimes it means distance. Sometimes it means no response at all. The key difference is that these choices no longer come from confusion or emotional overwhelm. They come from clarity. At this level, you are no longer trying to change the narcissist, prove anything to them, or even protect yourself in a reactive way. You are simply living in alignment with what you now understand. Your energy is no longer tied up in managing them. And because of that, the entire dynamic loses its intensity. What seems like another step is really the quiet realization that there is nothing left to figure out, only something to consistently live out. There is not an eighth step waiting to be discovered, and reaching for one can quietly pull you back into the cycle of seeking answers instead of living them. By this point, what feels like a missing piece is actually the final shift, letting go of the need to keep labeling, counting, and structuring your way out of the experience. Because the truth is, you are no longer in it the way you once were. What might appear as an eighth way is the full embodiment of everything you have understood so far. It is no longer about applying techniques or reminding yourself what to do. It becomes a natural state where your peace, your decisions, and your sense of self are no longer influenced by the narcissist's behavior. You do not brace yourself before interactions. You do not replay conversations afterward. There is a quiet steadiness that replaces the old tension. At this stage, your perspective has fundamentally shifted. You see the patterns instantly, but they do not pull you in. You recognize manipulation without feeling the need to confront it. You notice inconsistency without trying to fix it. There is a sense of emotional neutrality that does not come from suppression, but from understanding. You have stopped expecting something different, and that acceptance frees you from the constant friction. The most important change here is internal. Your identity is no longer shaped in reaction to them. You are not defining yourself through resistance, defense, or survival. Instead, you are simply living in alignment with your own values, your own boundaries, and your own direction. Their presence, whether near or distant, no longer dictates your emotional state. What feels like the final step is actually the absence of steps altogether, because you have moved beyond managing the dynamic and into a space where it no longer manages you. In the end, what unsettles a narcissistic dynamic is not force, not confrontation, and certainly not trying to outplay it. It is your quiet withdrawal from everything that once sustained it. When you stop reacting, stop over-explaining, stop centering your life around their behavior, and finally stop participating in the cycle, the entire structure begins to collapse on its own. You realize that the power you thought they had was never truly theirs. It was the access you gave them to your time, your emotions, and your sense of self. And as you reclaim that access piece by piece, something far more important than control emerges: clarity. You no longer feel the need to win because you are no longer in a position where winning even matters. This is not about changing them. It never was. It is about changing your relationship to the dynamic so completely that their usual tactics lose their effect. Your detachment removes their fuel. Your boundaries limit their reach. Your self-focus redirects your energy. And your willingness to walk away dissolves their control. And in that space, something powerful takes root: a life that is no longer shaped by manipulation, but by intention. A life where your peace is protected, your identity is intact, and your energy is finally your own.